Welcome to TVBS Meeting Room, where we tackle global issues with a view from Taiwan. I'm your host, Wenqi Yu. Today, we're so pleased to have Fritz Demopoulos with us. Fritz, welcome.
Hey, Wenqi, how are you?
Good, good. So, Fritz, you have been a fascinating figure. So, you run one of the most successful online travel platforms in the world, Qunar, and you are also investing in early stage companies globally, including quite a few in China.
Right.
And you also sit on the listing committee of the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, also a philanthropist. But tell us what's going on in China. You've lived there for about 25 years, including Beijing and Hong Kong. What's the business environment like?
Well, I think China always presents us fantastic opportunities as investors, operators, entrepreneurs. Of course, it goes in waves, and there's a lot of complexity these days, new regulations and laws and some geopolitical considerations. But
everything.
Yeah, I mean everything. But but that's what happens with, you can argue, is it the world's largest market probably, or the second largest for sure?
Yeah.
And anytime something is big, it's just it's going to be affected by many factors.
Right, right. And so a lot of people feel like the economy is not doing well, and the question is, will things change after the 20th Party Congress, in your view?
Well, I'm glad that you asked that question. I guess to paraphrase from Manoj from Templeton yesterday, actually, I thought he made a really good point, is there's always a balance between, on one hand, social stability and reform and some of the things that the senior leadership in Beijing want to promote, and then growth on the other. Mm-hmm. It's a bit of a trade-off. And obviously the last few years we've seen reform seem to be front and center in the policy agenda of those in Beijing. And maybe after the Party Congress, maybe that'll shift a little bit more towards growth again, especially given the slowing economy and the demographic shift, and maybe a few other factors. And my gut tells me is over the coming years, there will always be that calibration with reform and stability on one side and maybe growth on the other.
It's a balancing act for them, for sure. Yeah. And but how quickly do you think the economy will bounce back?
I think it's going to take a little bit of time. Globally, obviously with inflation and of course driven mostly by the cost of energy and the uncertainty in Eastern Europe, obviously, even in Southeast Asia as well, in places like Myanmar too. So I think there's just a lot more uncertainty, and maybe the markets just need to take a deep breath, and the overall economy and consumers want to spend, I think, but they're also a little bit more cautious. There's a large concern about debt levels, and it's when things are booming and money is cheap, we're all beneficiaries of that as consumers spend more. And are we in another recalibration phase where maybe consumer debt and corporate debt and of course government debt in China, could it be too high, and there needs to be a small adjustment, and that might slow down growth in the short term? Could be. It could be.
I think a lot of people feel like it's really hard to read China. Like, there's always going to be those who are more optimistic about China, and then there are those who are pessimistic about China's future. What's interesting over the last few years is that I think Hong Kong has been sort of part of the conversation rather than just a separate place. And you've lived in Hong Kong for the last 10 years. What has changed in Hong Kong?
Well, a lot's changed. Obviously, we had a large amount of social unrest a few years ago, and then during the pandemic period, which hopefully we're coming out of, a big hope.
I think the policy, when is it effective? 0+3 is like...
I think it's already kicked in. Okay. So if I want to fly back tomorrow, I can.
Great. So you don't have to be quarantined.
That's right.
Penny Bay.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But some of those things, on one hand, the social unrest, and then and of course and the results of that, including the national security law and a range of other things, and then COVID, and then the exodus of a lot of international talent. That I think has changed the dynamic of the city a little bit. I do think there's probably an overreaction. I think Hong Kong is still going to be an incredible international hub, and I'm very optimistic. But who said that we have to be the only international hub?
That's an interesting point of view. I think a lot of people, especially those in the West, look at Hong Kong as an indicator of how China's economy is going to look like, right? Especially sort of Hong Kong is sort of the windows or the doors into the greater mainland China, and now there's some question about whether Hong Kong can continue to play that role, especially in the financial sector. And how do you feel about that?
Well, I think you never want to be just a gateway. That's not sustainable. I mean, the Singaporeans for years are saying, we're the gateway to China. Your friends in Taiwan are saying, we're the gateway to China. People in Hong Kong, we're the gateway to China. There's a bunch of people in Shanghai, no, we're the gateway to China. Right. Come to Shanghai, we're the head of the dragon. That's what they say about Shanghai. Right. And so I don't know so much about this idea of a gateway. I mean, I feel if you want to do business in China,
you have
just go to Beijing. Just go to Beijing.
Oh,
you don't have to go. I mean, you can go to Hong Kong too. I mean, Hong Kong has a lot of resources and talent. And of course, we have the financial markets, and the financial industry is very, very well developed.
One of the best. Yeah.
It is. I mean, in many years, more capital is raised through the Hong Kong market than any other exchange in the world.
Do you think Beijing wants to keep Hong Kong that way?
I think so. I mean, why not? I mean, I think it's a source of international capital that can be. And since Hong Kong is a part of China, it's probably easier to influence than, say, the NASDAQ or New York or London would be, or Singapore for that matter.
Well, over the last few years, and even at this conference, what we're seeing is that a lot of expats have left Hong Kong for Singapore, and I've heard that some may consider moving back to Hong Kong. What's the rivalry like between Singapore and Hong Kong these days?
I mean, I just.
Who do you bet on?
I don't know if it's a zero-sum game, to be honest. I mean, I think Singapore is a great city. It's a great country, and Hong Kong is a great semi-autonomous region, I guess. Come on, there's no comparison, right? I mean, Hong Kong is 30 times. The size of Singapore in terms of its financial markets and liquidity. I mean, there is no comparison when it comes to the financial industry. I think Singapore does well. I think on money management and in some of those areas, that's fine. It's good. I mean, but what we find is 2 or 3 players. I mean, in fact, maybe we need a third international center within the region, because then I think
Where would that be?
I don't know where it could be, but I mean. Maybe in KL or maybe Shanghai or maybe Tokyo will be a little bit more international, and I think that's just accretive. I think it just adds to I think the overall wealth, and so I don't look at it as a zero-sum game. I do think Hong Kong is well positioned. We have a lot of talent. We have laws that, especially security laws. And professional laws and all that sort of stuff that I think leads to an ecosystem that's very investor friendly, it's very transparent, investors have a lot of confidence in the city, and so we feel pretty good about that.
Yeah. Now, shifting to what you do in the rest of your time, you're a philanthropist yourself. Tell us sort of your philanthropic philosophy. Why do you think it's important to give back to society, and in what areas?
Well, I mean, we certainly think about philanthropy in a few ways. One way is we like to support the community we live in. but
in
also
Hong Kong.
Yeah, in Hong Kong. So we'd like to support Hong Kong and make Hong
Yeah,
Kong
there's a
more
lot of.
interesting place.
I think a lot of people used to think sort of Hong Kong is this very rich, wealthy community, but in reality, there's a lot of, the sort of underserved communities as well, right? And wasn't that sort of one of the sources of unrest the last few years?
It's true that I think the middle class has suffered quite a bit in Hong Kong, but every city or every country has other needs too. There's, from a philanthropic perspective, people in need, but also sometimes building and developing the arts and culture sector is important too. That adds to the quality and the quality of life of the city as well. And so there's a range of different things that we think about.
So you also give back to the engineers and, especially female and engineering education, is that right?
Yeah, so a big part of what we do is we try to encourage women to pursue the sciences, young women, and through scholarships and other programs, lab work and things like that. And of course we do that in many places in the world. And so I wanted to mention, we try to support our local community, but we also try to support where we're from too. Obviously, coming from the United States, I've been a beneficiary of many of the institutions in the United States, and I would like to support them and give back. But at the same time, we also want to support where we live too. So we want to do a little bit of both. And one of our key tentpole strategies is to support young women to pursue careers in the sciences.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for having this conversation with us. Wish you the best of luck, whether it's starting the next business as an investor or as a very successful philanthropist.
Well, thanks, Wenxi, and thanks, TVBS.
Thank you.